All right, you are now live.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're going to have a number of people make some presentations, and then we will answer questions from the media. If you are thinking of your questions as we're going along and want to drop them in the chat, that would be great. We'll address them at the conclusion of the prepared remarks. And I want to start by acknowledging a few of the people who were instrumental in bringing us to this day. I want to offer my deep appreciation to Rena Shaw and Judge Andre Davis. Rena has worked countless hours on this task force. She's overseen the work of the 10 committees, managed and overseen numerous public meetings, and just done a terrific job. Similarly, Judge Davis, we appreciate all of your efforts on this. Judge Davis developed these recommendations along with the rest of the task force and the executive committee, and offered us his wisdom and experience, which was invaluable. I want to thank the committee co-chairs, the volunteer leaders, and their Office of the Attorney General counterparts. They all devoted an exceptional amount of time and energy to drive the committee's work. And a special recognition to the members of the steering committee. They have worked tirelessly and contributed significantly to the production of the report. The executive committee includes Ward Coe, who is the chair of the Bar's Access to Justice Commission, David Epler, Zanita Hurley, Shelley Martin, all from my office, Victoria Schultz from the University of Baltimore Law School, Rena Shaw, and my Deputy Attorney General, Carolyn Quattrocchi. The project relied on many partners, including more than 250 committee members, 40 staff from our office, numerous staff and support from our partner, the Maryland Access to Justice Commission and the Maryland State Bar Association. And finally, I would like to thank Waldron Strategies, Tom Waldron, and Devia Lilly Designs for their work in developing and designing the final report. And also very warm thanks and gratitude to the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the ABLE Foundation for their generous support of the task force. So early in spring of 2020, we realized that the COVID-19 virus was making people sick all across our country. In addition to becoming sick, many people died. Entire families lost their jobs, their livelihoods. Going to work itself was fraught with risk. Households fell behind on rent, mortgage payments. Other debts began to accumulate. Children whose families lacked technology, resources to support online learning, lost months of school. Frantic attempts to obtain unemployment insurance, health insurance, other public benefits were met with frustration as safety net systems were overwhelmed. Abuse victims were forced to lock down with their abusers, and older adults in congregate settings were set off from families who could flag abuse and neglect. As with so much else before the pandemic, these calamities fell most heavily on low-income persons, people of color, and people with disabilities. We recognized that the pandemic was going to create immeasurable harm to the health and well-being of our citizens, and we resolved to do something about it. The state's civil justice system, where problems like eviction, debt, abuse, unemployment must often be resolved, was thrown into disarray and already difficult to navigate for disadvantaged communities. The system was strained by the pandemic. Underfunded in the best of times, the system simply could not meet the need of so many Marylanders facing life-threatening adversity. We realized the state needed a more coordinated and urgent response. And while Marylanders' problems ran the gamut from healthcare and housing to safety and economic security, the common thread running throughout was the importance of access to civil justice. We partnered, as I've said, with the Maryland Access to Justice Commission to establish the Attorney General's COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force. We brought together 43 leaders from the public, nonprofit, philanthropic sectors, from the business community, the legal community, the judicial and legislative branches of our government, and from academia. In addition, the Maryland's US senators and most of our US representatives served on our Congressional Advisory Committee. Our objective was to examine the COVID-19's impact on Marylanders, make recommendations on how to deploy the legal system to ensure that the state's most vulnerable remained housed, fed, safe, secure, employed, healthy, and connected to civil justice. The task force was also charged expressly with developing its assessment and recommending solutions that would bolster racial equity. Its mandate was to craft policy responses with a clear-eyed view of the structural racism and inequities that have both deepened the challenges faced by communities of color and have denied access to the civil justice system so central to resolving these challenges. COVID-19 did not create the systemic failings and inequities of our social safety net and our civil justice system, but it laid bare the fault lines, and the pandemic exacerbated and brought to light with painful clarity the deficiencies and the suffering that they cause. So we present our report today. There are 59 significant legislative and policy recommendations that will help Marylanders recover from the devastating impact of COVID-19, and we hope address longstanding inequities. Judge Davis is going to walk us through in a few moments some of the recommendations, but I want to highlight a couple, and they are these. First, we have a serious problem in funding legal services in our state. And during this pandemic, the sources that fund our legal aid and legal services essentially dried up. The other problem that is extraordinarily significant is that we face a wave of evictions. Folks are on the precipice of becoming homeless, and we expect hundreds of thousands of cases as soon as the restraints that have been put on our eviction system by the state and the federal government end. In Maryland, we have about 665,000 evictions every year. We only have about 825,000 rental units. So that's an extraordinary number. And one of the reasons is that landlords file multiple times during the year against the same tenants. There are some landlords that file every month on the 6th of the month, regardless of whether the tenant always pays on the 8th or always pays on the 10th. Landlords are in court on the 6th. The cost of filing an eviction in Maryland is one of the cheapest in the country. We are third from the bottom. It's $15. Some states impose fees as high as $300, $350 for filing an eviction. The national average is $122. These low filing fees cause landlords to engage in what we call serial evictions. And the filing rate in some counties is over 100%. Overall, statewide, it's 80%. And you have to compare that to the eviction rates in neighboring states. It's 5.3% in Pennsylvania, 16.9% in Delaware, New Jersey, DC, Virginia range from 12.5% to 15.7%. Maryland's 80% rate dwarfs them all. So our office is going to be pushing two of the recommendations in our task force. We will seek to increase the cost of filing an eviction from $15 to about the national average of $120, and we will seek to prohibit landlords from passing that cost along to tenants. We believe that'll do two things. One, it will reduce substantially the number of filings, and two, it will raise significant amounts of money for legal services, because we will seek to have the additional funds devoted to just that. It will, we hope, allow the Maryland Legal Services Corporation to essentially provide right to counsel in eviction proceedings. Now I'm going to turn to two Marylanders who can speak directly to the impact of the pandemic, and I believe we have them both on videotape. And the first statement is going to come from Mr. Floyd Hartley. Bill, can you cue that up?
My name is Floyd Hartley, and I just want to take a moment to talk to you about nursing facilities and disability rights in Maryland. Actually, I was living in a nursing facility about maybe 15 years ago to date. And while there was a young lady that told me about a lawyer that worked with Disability Rights Maryland who was visiting her to let her know that there were healthcare services in the community. So I, like many others that I've met, wanted to be home. So I got with the lawyer, and us working together, she helped me get home with services that I needed from the Medicaid waiver program with the state. I hadn't lived in a large congregated care facility, and I don't think anybody else would. It was kind of dehumanized, and I had no independence. I had no life. I missed being with my family, missed going to church, being with my friends, and I really couldn't find any type of purpose or make any contribution except to advocate with those that were in the facility. And like now, I think it's just a horrific moment to be in a nursing facility, because about half of the COVID-19 deaths, basically in Maryland, nearly 2,500 or more are people that live in the nursing facilities. So just think, this could have been me, you know. And what upsets me the most is that I work with Disability Rights Maryland to meet with individuals in the nursing facility to let them know about healthcare service. And so far, we have spoken with several people who actually have had COVID. And I just think it's our civil rights to help those people move back into the community. And this COVID pandemic has actually disproportionately hurt actually the people of color in the communities and the nursing facilities also. So I just think that there's a need to have the state to change the way that they're doing things and help people move back into the community. So I just think we need to support people to move back into the community also. And one of the things that, I always say that it's um, our homes and not nursing homes. So I think, the state can do a much better job in helping people move back into the community. Um, and I guess that's just about all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to see a short video from Lisa Green.
Hi, my name is Lisa Green, and I live in Curtis Bay. During the early days of the pandemic, I was laid off from my job, driving circulator buses in Baltimore City. I fell behind on my bills. I did my best to apply for jobs and rental assistance, but wasn't getting anywhere. I asked my landlord for the documentation so that I could apply for help, but he wouldn't cooperate. My landlord was never very good about keeping up with the property, but I still love my house and I take good care of my garden. The past summer, I started having rat problems. I knew the problems would only get worse unless it was treated professionally. Seeing and hearing rats scurrying around was disgusting, but it was worse to hear my landlord's reaction. He wouldn't send an exterminator. I felt so upset, so I reached out to legal help, and I couldn't stop from crying when I left a voicemail. I learned about my rights to demand repairs. I found out that my landlord, Shobli, bookkeeping might be a big part of why I never got rental assistance from Baltimore City. My landlord was able to file a failure to pay rent eviction case against me, but the Public Justice Center represented me. I found out about defenses related to my job loss and to the CDC's order restricting evictions. Sitting in the courtroom last October, I saw others trying to raise similar defenses, but they didn't quite say the right things or had the right paperwork available. They lost. If an attorney hadn't been there with me, I'm sure I would have not won my case. Winning my case didn't stop the landlord from filing another eviction case against me. I'm worried that when I try to find a new place to live prospectively, landlords will see the case and think that I'm a bad tenant. They won't know that my landlord hasn't cooperated with my efforts to apply for help. They won't know that I love my home and I just want my landlord to do his part. My next court date will be postponed, but I have another eviction action to worry about. Soon after I stood up for myself in court, my landlord got a lawyer to send me a letter which said that I had to leave by December the 4th because my lease was over. I'm glad I knew where to go to get legal help. Public Justice Center explained that my landlord is trying to evict me through the tenant holding over process, which is not covered by the CDC order or the governor executive order. I know that my landlord wants to get rid of me and he knows the failure to pay rent process is delayed right now. He's using this process as a way to put me out as fast as he can. I'm lucky that I have found legal services and I know my rights. Without legal assistance, I might have lost my home in November just as I was starting to get back on my feet. I'm in training to be an MTA bus driver, and I finally have a paycheck coming in a few months. I'll have enough to move out of this property that has been my home. And meantime, I have to stop. I have to keep struggling. My furnace malfunctioned, and my landlord has ignored all requests for repairs. I, when I caught the Corona-19 virus at my job, I had to suffer through fevers and chills and no heat in my home. I love my home and I love my neighborhood. I pick up the trash to keep Curtis Bay clean. 2 years in a row, I won awards for my front garden. I have lived here almost 4 years, and I'm in central transit worker and access to my community, but I know I need help. The government needs to expand access to legal services so no one has to face eviction alone. I need my lawmakers to see that there are loopholes, big loopholes in our eviction laws that allows landlords to get around protection and failure to pay rent cases and evict quickly through lease termination. I'm a bus driver, a COVID-19 survivor, and essential worker. Strong protections for renters will help keep people like me in my home.
Okay. Next, we're going to hear from Vice Chair of the Task Force, Rena Shaw.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Frosch. And thank you, Mr. Floyd and Ms. Green, for sharing your testimony with us and sharing your struggles with us. Hello, everyone. I'm Rena Shaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission and Vice Chair of the Attorney General's Access to Justice Task Force. The Commission is an independent organization. We are housed in the Maryland State Bar Association, and our work would not be possible without the MSBA's support and backing. We are honored to have partnered with the Attorney General on this high-level and high-impact COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force that built a big and diverse tent. Excuse me. Something happened, I apologize. That built a big and diverse tent. And we examined critical issues and developed substantive recommendations to confront the civil justice crisis caused by COVID-19. The Commission has been in existence in different capacities since 2008. Its mission is to ensure civil justice for all Marylanders, no matter how much money they have. We are proud that much of the work that was started in the task force will continue in the Commission. Now, we are all aware of the health and economic crisis caused by COVID-19. However, before this task force, not many were aware of its relationship to the civil justice system. This is why the work of the task force has been so important. As of today, 6,100 Marylanders have died of COVID-19 and hundreds of thousands more have tested positive and sought medical care. As a result of lockdowns and restrictions necessary to slow down the spread of the virus, unemployment has soared. But how does that lead to a civil justice crisis? The civil justice system is not well known, certainly not as well known as the criminal justice system that has about 100 TV shows devoted to it, like Law and Order. The civil justice system covers a wide range of civil legal issues that deal with human needs like housing, health, food, safety, and security. And justice can be meted out in federal courts, state courts, and administrative agencies. And the civil justice system was already having a disproportionate impact on people of color. For example, in state courts in 2018, if you take out traffic violations, civil cases made up 85% of the 1,300,000 total cases. A critical difference between the civil justice system and the criminal justice system is that there is no right to an attorney if you cannot afford one in most civil legal cases in Maryland. And even before the pandemic, 71% of low-income Americans already faced at least one civil legal issue every year. And 70% of those said that it had a significant effect on their lives. COVID-19 has only made things worse. For example, the people who got sick or passed away have had to deal with getting legal documents like medical directives or powers of attorney or make wills or navigate the state's probate process. For the people who were unemployed, they had to file for public benefits like unemployment insurance, SNAP benefits, and Medicaid. For the people who have fallen behind on their bills, they have to face evictions and debt collection cases. For the people that have had to endure lockdowns or homeschooling with their abuser or have been isolated in nursing facilities, they have had to file for protective orders or lost legal protections that came with monitoring and oversight. Unfortunately, most Marylanders have had to do all of this on their own. They have had to navigate all of these complex legal processes on their own. With executive and administrative orders changing rapidly and new protections being put in place and then expiring, it is a tremendous amount to keep track of, even for professionals. Chances of success without civil legal support and aid are not high. For example, a study showed that 83% success rate with an attorney in a protective order case versus only 32% success without legal representation. Many Marylanders were already facing unjust outcomes, not because they did anything wrong, but because they did not have the legal help they needed. We must remember that even before the pandemic, we already could not help 80% of the people who needed help with a civil legal problem. During the pandemic, civil legal aid funding decreased by almost $10 million out of a total of only about 21 million, which was a 46% decline. And organizations that provided legal support also saw demand rise and funding fall, making it even harder for people to get help with a civil legal problem when they most needed it. The task force came together to confront these issues head on, and over 6 months has already had an impact. The task force's advocacy with the governor and the strong leadership of the attorney general led to success in getting $11.7 million in one-time short-term funding to keep the civil legal aid community funded. But many more reforms are still needed to address the barriers to access to justice. The final report of the task force recommends a comprehensive set of bold yet achievable policy reforms and innovative solutions to address many of the barriers to the civil justice system. The time for action is now. As the pandemic still rages, if reforms in this report are implemented, there is still time to make changes that will have significant impact and stop us from reinforcing harms in the civil justice system to those already most impacted by COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rena. Before I introduce Judge Davis, let me just mention that we have a number of members of the judiciary who are on the task force who are here this morning, and I just wanted to recognize them. We have Judge Stacy Mayer, Judge Kathleen Cox, and Judge Mark Skirty. Your Honors, we deeply appreciate your presence here this morning, and more importantly, your extraordinarily helpful efforts on the task force. Now, let me turn it over to the other vice chair of the task force, Judge Andre Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And thank you to you and to Rena and to Zanita and all the chairs and members of the task force for an incredible job on behalf of the people of Maryland. Rena, are the slides shown? I don't see them, but I'll proceed. Okay, good. If I could go to the slide before that. I want to briefly review the task force recommendations, and I will be brief, but I just want to point out at the beginning that all of these recommendations, as both Rena and the Attorney General alluded to, were really the product of a collaborative effort by so many people. And all of the work of the task force was reviewed, assessed, and considered in the light of what we know to be, and as the Attorney General acknowledged, certain structural and systemic racially disparate effects on communities of color. And so our Policy and Racial Equity Committee was careful to make sure that every committee, without our needing to say so, every committee reviewed their recommendations and did their studies in the light of existing disparate impacts on communities of color. And so we are very, very pleased that many of these recommendations, again, as the Attorney General mentioned, are prompted by, the immediate prompt was the impact of the pandemic on people's access to justice, broadly conceived. But the fact of the matter is, many of these recommendations are designed to and will in fact address long-standing inequities in the provision of services. And this was a whole government approach to resolving human problems. As you will see in the detailed recommendations you will find on pages 10 through 15 of the report, these recommendations will require and be supported by legislative efforts, executive branch agency efforts, governor's office efforts, as well as the courts. And we have real confidence that a whole government approach to these challenges will bring the kind of relief, particularly again to communities of color, that is so desperately needed. So what we've done is we've set out the recommendations in what we call 5 overarching, if you will, communities of interest in terms of the challenges that are faced by Marylanders. And it is no mistake, of course, that we begin with the need to ensure that Marylanders are housed. As the Attorney General explained in some detail, housing security is such an important ingredient to adequately addressing the needs of people as we get through and hopefully come out on the other side of the pandemic. Maryland has been for many, many decades a very, very landlord favored jurisdiction, and it is time for that to change. And one of the ways that will change, if our recommendations, and we hope they will be adopted, is to increase, as the Attorney General mentioned, the filing fee so that eviction does not become simply a collection mechanism for landlords in Maryland. We know from research and common sense that all too often, eviction is the first falling domino in a cascade of spiraling downward for families and individuals. A loss of housing often leads to a loss of income, a loss of stability, and in the middle of a pandemic, again, as the report points out, it actually exacerbates the health challenges that people faced when so many are required to move into tighter quarters with family and friends, thereby undermining the public health imperative of social distance living and quarantining. So we are hopeful that the Maryland legislature and the courts will embrace the recommendations of the task force to lessen the impact, particularly on people, communities of color, and low-income persons of our outdated summary ejectment landlord-tenant procedures in Maryland. Second, we strongly encourage, again, from a whole government approach, that Marylanders be economically secure and that their preservation of financial resources and life planning opportunities are not undermined. Particularly with regard to economic security, we think that it's time for the Maryland Judiciary and the Maryland General Assembly, as the case may be, to cease the practice of body attachments in the collection of consumer debt. This has echoes from medieval debt prisons, and a body attachment is nothing other than a fancy word for an arrest warrant. And people should not be arrested when they are facing financial difficulties, making it impossible for them to settle their lawful debts. There are other ways in which the state can address the need to achieve greater economic security and less onerous collection practices when those finding economic difficulty are brought into the civil justice system. Number three, we need to ensure that Marylanders are healthy and have food security. Again, food insecurity is a long-standing problem in many of our communities in the state, and we need to ensure that those who are impacted both by the pandemic effects through loss of employment and in other ways have the wherewithal to have access to health care and access to the food their families need to maintain their health. We urge regulatory and, if necessary, legislative fixes to our uninsurance benefit program in the state to increase transparency, to smooth out the kinks that we know are in the system, and to provide a seamless transition for those who lose their employment and thus, in many instances, their health care to be directed immediately and with very little effort into the state's health care system for low-income and unemployed individuals. We should be able to achieve this kind of change really through mere clicks in a box on an online form. And we encourage regulators and the General Assembly to act promptly on these recommendations. Fourth, it's important that we ensure that Marylanders are safe and that they are safe in their personal safety, their physical well-being and individual dignity, both in their residence, including in their congregate living spaces where that's the situation, as well as in the workplace. We urge all the regulatory agencies of the state in their emergency planning to take account of the need to maintain workplace safety. And we urge the General Assembly to look at the need to ensure adequate oversight of those living in congregate living situations so that they have access to family and guardians who can ensure that the proper safety protocols are being followed. And in the workplace, we encourage regulatory agencies again to ensure that the workplace in a pandemic and after the pandemic is a safe place to work, that individuals have protection when they raise objections to inadequate safety precautions taken in the workplace, and that adequate regulatory response is ensured when complaints and concerns are raised to the appropriate authorities. And finally, the need for enhanced funding of access to justice programs could not be more apparent. With the pandemic, we saw a dramatic decrease in the funding to the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, which is the principal source of funding for legal services provisions to those in need. Fortunately, through the action of the governor and the attorney general, over the short term, those funding challenges have been met, but they continue to impose great burdens on our ability to ensure that lawyers are provided to those who need lawyers to make their way through the civil justice system, as well as support for lawyers who volunteer to provide pro bono services which is a critical component. And the task force has very strongly recommended that lawyers, the members of the Maryland Bar, step up and provide those services. And then thirdly, and equally important, that we continue to support and build out remote access to legal services for those who are unrepresented by attorneys, who can perhaps on their own make their way through the legal services, through the civil justice system, using technology and other resources provided by 501c3 organizations, as well as the wonderful job that the Maryland courts have done to provide access to remote legal services. So again, this is a summary of our recommendations. Hats off to the remarkable people who work long hours to bring these recommendations to the fore. And we look forward to the continuing efforts of the Maryland Commission on Access to Justice in its efforts to ensure that every civil litigant in a critical item of civil litigation or impending civil litigation will have access to a lawyer to level the playing field and to make equal justice under law a reality in Maryland in the civil sphere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Davis. We deeply appreciate your help on the commission. It's very unusual, I would say, to have somebody with Judge Davis's wide background in justice, both at the state level and at the federal level and at the highest levels. It's rare to have somebody contribute as much effort, time, and wisdom as he has done. So we're very grateful to you for that. I want to take a moment to recognize a few other people. None of our senators and congressmen could be here today. As you may have heard, there are some extraordinary things going on in Washington these days, and they are hard at work there. But we have Tricia Russell here representing Senator Van Hollen. Thanks for joining us, Tricia. We also have some members of the General Assembly, and if ladies and gentlemen, you would like to bring greetings, let me recognize you individually. First, we have the chairman of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee, Will Smith. Will, would you like to say hi? Raise your hand, say a few words. Okay, let me then turn to the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Delegate Luke Klippinger. Luke.
Good morning. It's been a privilege to be part of this group, and I certainly look forward to seeing many of the people who've been working on these important recommendations virtually over the next 90 days. But really appreciated the opportunity to work with everyone on the call and work with the Attorney General on these important issues.
Thank you for joining the task force and for your great work. We have Delegate Sandy Bartlett. Good morning, Sandy.
Good morning, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you. Thank you to Speaker Jones for appointing me to the task force. It has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you to our vice chairs, Rena Shaw and Judge Davis, and the members of the steering committee, including Zanita Hurley. It has been an awesome task, but an enjoyable task to work with so many members from various areas. I had the opportunity to co-chair the Surviving Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation Committee. And I did that with the great assistance of my co-chair, Shelley Mintz from the Office of the Attorney General. So a big thank you to Shelley and all the members of that committee. On behalf of the members of the committee, I would like to encourage my colleagues at the General Assembly to review, consider, and advocate for the recommendations that are within the proposed legislation and policy report that has been provided. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thanks for your good work, Delegate. We really appreciate it. And finally, we have Delegate Jazz Lewis with us this morning. Jazz, are you with us? Well, he was here earlier. He may have had to leave. Okay, are there questions from the media? If you would like to either unmute yourself and ask directly or put a question in the chat, we'd be delighted to answer them.
Yes, Mr. Attorney General. Steve Lash with the Daily Record. Okay, the question you probably expected. Why did the task force not recommend a statutory right to counsel in all civil cases if your goal was to make equal justice under law a reality in Maryland in the civil sphere?
Well, one of our recommendations was right to counsel in eviction proceedings. And the ultimate objective of building up legal services in our state is to provide right to counsel across the board in civil proceedings where people's lives are on the line. And that includes evictions, in some cases foreclosures, in fights about whether they can receive public benefits, in abuse and neglect situations, and a number of others. But our work was based in reality and the understanding that resources are not limitless, and in fact that the state is very hard pressed at the moment. I think we believe that right to counsel, at least in eviction proceedings, is within our grasp in the near future, especially if we can bring the costs of filing an eviction action in line with that of the rest of the country. And so we're looking for targets that we can hit. And we thought that was not an easy one, but a near-term one that was achievable. And I think every member of the, I shouldn't say every member of the task force, but I think in general, the task force accepts and believes in the principle that we should have a civil Gideon law across the board. I don't know if Judge Davis or Rena would like to add anything to that.
Sir, we did get another question regarding funding. There was mention of the biggest challenge in finding legal help, the lack of centralized intake, and the fact that Marylanders must wander from organization to find help. They unnecessarily miss work, have to arrange childcare, etc. Will additional MLSC funding be tied to improving this system failure?
I don't think the task force specifically addressed that, but the idea that we hope to increase the funding for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, which funds the other legal services entities throughout the state, would come with some reforms, some additional administrative ability. But right now, the funds are so scarce that they make grants and hope that their grantees are able to provide services. I don't know whether either of my co-presenters this morning or Susan Ehrlichman or someone would like to address that further, but I think we recognize there's an issue that not only are legal services seriously underfunded, they only are able to address about 20% of the need, but also that with more funding, greater coordination could be achieved.
Attorney General, this is Rina Shah. I just wanted to add that certainly we recognize that there isn't a single intake system in Maryland. What we wanted to focus on because we wanted to address things that could immediately have an impact. One part is having a single point of entry to ensure that people get at least the information that they need, and they get the referrals that they need. And we're working, and the recommendations do address how there needs to be a single source of information and more coordination. And so that more will be done on that front. We have a lot of technical expertise on the task force that looked at this issue, and it came out that we really need to focus on the information gaps, the referral gaps, and we are actively addressing those in our recommendations.
We have two other questions at the moment. One from Rachel Carden. Can you list the three main goals, topics of the task force again? Maybe Bill could put up the slide that has the 5 key areas that Judge Davis ran through as a summary. It's, there we go. Ensure Marylanders are housed, are economically secure, healthy, have enough to eat, they're safe in their workplaces and at home, and that they have meaningful access to the civil justice system. The report itself goes much deeper than this one slide, but those are the main recommendations, categories of recommendations. We're also asked by Danielle Ohl, can you address your recommendation that landlords file an affidavit before court action in failure to pay rent cases? Maryland is one of very few states in the country that does not require any sort of notice before an eviction filing, and summary ejectment process happens very quickly. Do you envision this affidavit as a step to slow down that process? And the answer is yes, this is a very important recommendation of the task force. The first thing a tenant gets is a lawsuit saying, we're trying to throw you out. In most other states, the tenant first gets a notice. You don't pay the rent in 5 days, 10 days, whatever it is, we are going to sue you. So get the rent in. We think that would be an extraordinarily useful and important change to Maryland law to require a notice prior to filing of the suit. And I know that Delegate Melissa Wells and I believe Senator Charles Sidner have legislation they're planning to introduce to effectuate that recommendation of the task force. And I think Danielle has another question. Report recommends publicizing data from evictions. Right now, there's an incredible administrative backlog and even digitizing failure to pay rent and other landlord-tenant filings. Cases in Baltimore City, Prince George's, Baltimore, Montgomery are not an MDEC. And how does your office recommend overcoming that pretty hefty hurdle? Well, MDEC is the statewide e-filing system, and it is, I think, very unfortunate that 3 of our largest jurisdictions are not yet up on MDEC. It would provide us with extremely useful data that we cannot now access. And this has been a very long process. I believe that the courts began to address computerizing the filing and data collection systems back when I was chairman of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the mid-2000s. And all I can say is that process, finishing that process, will be extremely useful in many, many ways. And I believe the task force report refers to and recommends that the process be finished as quickly as is humanly possible. Rena, did you, or Judge Davis, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes.
I would just like to say, Mr. Attorney General, that the need for reform in the summary ejectment rent collection process here in Maryland, as I mentioned, and as you know, and you've advocated very strongly, has been in need of reform for many decades. And in addition to legislative action, it seems clear to me that the courts have the authority to act on the existing system to make it more fair, more appropriate. For example, in the area of domestic relations, the courts have imposed a certain level of mediation type process before child custody disputes and similar disputes actually get before a judge. And in my view, there's no reason courts couldn't similarly, in the context of landlord-tenant disputes, stand up a robust mediation type process, as well as authorize judges to exercise continuing authority over failure to pay rent cases, even after a judgment, so that an eviction is not welded against the tenant in an inappropriate way. So this is an area that really cries out for reform and has cried out for reform for many years. And so we're at a point of reckoning, because the consequences when the moratoria on evictions finally arrive, sometimes this spring, or perhaps, there will be a need to have in place processes so that hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people are cast out into the street.
And I will just add to what Judge Davis said and what the Attorney General said. You know, one of the key findings in this report is that civil justice data generally, not just about evictions, but data itself is not readily available. One of the things that the task force worked on, during the course was actually developing a civil justice data dashboard, which you can view on the Attorney General's website that has the task force information. But we found this to be really important because it's hard to come up with recommendations and have policy proposals when you are not guided by data. There is an eviction lab hosted at Princeton University where Matthew Desmond is collecting data from across the nation on what is happening with evictions. And Maryland has very little data to offer there. And so we're quite behind in terms of being able to use data and be informed in our policy decisions by data. And it goes beyond the evictions, but that's a good place to start because we know that's going to be such a large issue. Our understanding is that the courts have this data and it's a matter of being able to publicize it. And it's not really related so much to the MDEC system. It's about, how many evictions, how many case filings there are, how many evictions there are. And you'll see in the data dashboard that we have tried to, find this information and put it up on the dashboard there.
Okay, thanks folks. We're almost at the end of our time. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, let me just say thanks again. Thanks to all of the members of the task force, to everybody who participated in our committee work, and again to our vice chairs and members of the executive committee. Thank you for being here this morning, and we'll continue to be available for your inquiries, questions, and comments.
Mr. Attorney General, may I?
Yes,
address a comment to you? May I?
Yes, please.
As you are aware, Maryland Legal Aid carries the largest responsibility to respond to the civil legal needs of low-income people here in Maryland. So we want to send to you a special thank you to you your co-chairs, Rena Shaw and Honorable Andre Davis, a special thank you for your leadership, your foresight, creativity, persistence, and so on. I think that there are many important messages that your work send, but three I want to highlight. One, you have again expressed your commitment to ensuring access to justice for all. You acknowledge the idea that the basic human needs that you've outlined as your priorities are basic human rights. And three, something that's absent all over the country, you are saying that low-income people actually are being heard and that they can count on you, that they have a voice and friends in influential places. So I want to pledge on behalf of Maryland Legal Aid, staff, board, supporters, funders, etc., that we will do everything to help you and the entire task force and leaders achieve the goals you have set forth. It's really, really special what Maryland has done. You stand out above every other state as far as I know. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks for the kind words, Wilhelm, and we appreciate the great work that Legal Aid does as well. All right, folks, I think that brings us to the end of this press conference. Thanks again for your great work. Thanks for